Shabbat Shalom. We are going to begin with the blessing for studying Torah. Move it over here. Here we are. Okay, so let's go ahead and recite together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Okay, before we begin with where we left off, I found something in the Jonathan Kirsch book about King David, which, by the way, I hate to say this when it's being recorded, but this is basically like a paraphrase of the story. It's not very analytical, so just FYI. But I did find something about the Psalms because somebody asked me several times ago about the Psalms, and I did do a little research and I emailed you, but I just want to read you what he says in here about the Psalms, because as you know, King David is supposed to be the author of the Psalms. So he says, pious tradition assigns the authorship of the entire book of Psalms to King David himself, but modern scholarship allows that only a few of the Psalms date back to the supposed lifetime of David, and none can be proven to be his own work. The oldest of the Psalms may have originated in the coronation rituals of the Davidic kings, and Psalm 45 in particular, apparently composed for the wedding of an Israelite king and a foreign-born woman, may refer to King Solomon. As you know, King Solomon is David's son, as Sherry now knows, since she was able to answer all kinds of biblical questions on Jeopardy. Other Psalms, however, are dated no earlier than the Babylonian conquest and the destruction of the Temple of Solomon in 586 BCE, which is several hundred years after King David. If King David was King David, the way he's portrayed in the Bible, we don't even know that much. Still, various of the Psalms are associated with specific events in the life of David. Psalm 51, for example, is linked to David's remorse over his sexual liaison with Bathsheba. Hide thy face from my sins and blot out all mine iniquities, pleads the man whom the Bible calls the sweet singer of Israel. Create me a clean heart, O God. Notably, no such self-abasing prayers are uttered by King David, as we come to know him in the work of the court historian, and we are left to wonder which depiction of David, the worldly wise king or the pious penitent, is more faithful to the flesh and blood David, who can be glimpsed beneath the surface of the ancient text. So, unlikely that he wrote the Psalms. However, we can always hope or believe. Okay, so let's just review where we were last time. Anybody remember where we left off? What happened last, I know it was a couple, 2 or 3 weeks ago, but were things going well for David?
Lynn always knows.
Lynn?
No, I don't always know. But I'm thinking, didn't he get Absalom back?
Got Absalom back. He was
but
a little cold to him, remember?
For 2 years, and I think Absalom, that I forgot. That's as far as I remember.
That's pretty good. Pretty good. Okay. Yes, Jane.
As I remember, Amnon raped Tamar, threw her out of the house. She went to her brother's house and stayed there disgraced for the rest of her life.
And her brother being Absalom.
And then 2 years, has 2 years gone by?
Yes.
2 years have gone by, and Absalom has a feast. Are we up to that part where Absalom has a feast and invites Amnon and all his brothers to the feast, and he kills Amnon?
Correct.
And then he runs away.
Correct. And when he runs away, what does he do when he runs away?
Doesn't he take a lot of David's men with him?
Well, he starts a rebellion against.
He starts.
Right?
I didn't remember if we were up to that part. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Lynn said something. He came back to court. Is he back to court already?
Well, what happened was he did come back.
Mhm.
And David was kind of cold to him.
Right.
Remember that? And then he, okay, so Amnon represents the side of David that's, sexually aggressive and, impulsive, right? Because remember, Nathan, the prophet, said to David, what you've done in public is going to happen to you in private. Okay,
Mhm.
so the first thing was that, David takes Bathsheba, gets her pregnant, has her husband killed. So Amnon decides he is lusting after his sister, half sister Tamar, and must have her. He basically rapes her and then tosses her out. As you said, she goes to Absalom's house. Absalom's very angry because David doesn't do anything. Just like, remember, Jacob didn't do anything when his daughter got raped, and the brothers took it into their own hands. History repeats itself, right? And so Absalom, leaves, and when he does come back, David's kind of cold to him. And then Absalom represents the political ambition that David has always had. Okay, so we are going to pick it up at 2 Samuel 15. And here it is. Would somebody like to read?
I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run ahead of him. Absalom used to rise early and stand beside the road into the gate. And when anyone brought a suit before the king for judgment, Absalom would call out and say, "From what city are you?" When the person said, "Your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no one deputed by the king to hear you." Absalom said, moreover, "If only I were judge in the land, then all who had a suit or cause might come to me, and I would give them justice." Whenever people came near to do obeisance to him, he would put out his hand and take hold of them and kiss them. Thus Absalom did to every Israelite who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the people of Israel.
Okay, thank you. I guess he hasn't started his rebellion yet. I apologize for that. Okay, so what he's doing here is he's at the gate, right? And first of all, he gets a chariot and horses and all of that. And that's kind of a claim to royal status by taking those things. And it's right under David's nose. David is not doing anything about this, right? And then he goes to the gate and, is kind of saying, oh, he's flattering people. You have the right claim. You should be, found, the judgment should be in your favor. And he kisses people, right? And flatters them and, ingratiates himself to them. And, oh, gee, if I were the judge of the land, things would be different, right? And then it says, he stole the hearts of the people. Remember when Saul was king, you had David stealing the hearts of the people, right? People thought that David was really great, right? Saul has killed his thousands, but David's killed his tens of thousands, right? And now you've got his son sort of doing the exact same thing. And you will not see David doing anything about it, okay? Just letting this fester. Okay, let's see. Yeah, you can continue.
Oh, thank you. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow that I've made to the Lord. For your servant made a vow while I lived at Geshur in Aram. If the Lord will indeed bring me back to Jerusalem, then I will worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So he got up and went to Hebron. But Absalom sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then shout, 'Absalom has become king at Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem went with Absalom. They were invited guests and they went in their innocence. knowing nothing of the matter. While Absalom was offering the sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor from his city Gilo. The conspiracy grew in strength, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. Can
So,
you review again what the importance of Hebron is, to be crowned in Hebron?
right. All right. Well, that's the in Judah where these guys are from. But I'll read you what Alter says about pay my vow that I pledged to the Lord in Hebron. Haim Gevaryahu proposes that the vow is to offer an exculpatory sacrifice for the crime of manslaughter, right? Remember that? He killed his brother. With 3 years in Geshur and another 4 in Jerusalem, Absalom would have come to the end of the period of 7 years of penance that, according to some ancient parallels, might have applied to such crimes. I mean, we're not sure that that's what he's doing, but it could be. Absalom, of course, wants to go off to Hebron, David's first capital city, in order to proclaim himself king at a certain distance from his father's palace. It also appears that he feels he can call on a base of support from Judah, his father's tribe. But why is David not suspicious when his son proposes to pay his cultic vow in Hebron rather than in Jerusalem? Gevaryahu, citing Greek analogs, makes the interesting suggestion that a fratricide who had not yet atoned for his crime was not permitted to worship in the same sanctuary as his father and brothers. Anyway, that could be the cover story, but really what he wants to do is go down to Hebron and crown himself king down there and then start a rebellion. You know, you keep getting this sort of theme of South and North fighting each other. You know, eventually the two are going to split. But, you know, remember David was basically king of Judah, and Hebron was his capital before he was able to take over the whole country. So this, again, parallels what his father had done. Let me see if there's anything else. Yeah. Okay, so anybody have any comments or questions before we continue? Okay, let's continue. Jane, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Where are we?
13.
13. Oh, thank you. A messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the Israelites have gone after Absalom. Then David said to all his officials who were with him at Jerusalem, get up, let us flee, or there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Hurry, or he will soon overtake us and bring disaster down upon us, and attack the city with the edge of the sword. The king's officials said to the king, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king decides. So the king left, followed by all his household, except 10 concubines whom he left behind to look after the house. The king left, followed by all the people, and they stopped at the last house. All his officials passed him by, and all the Cherethites, and all the Pelatites, and all 600 Gittites who had followed him from Gath passed on before the king.
Okay, so I guess the concubines I read ahead, Absalom hasn't slept with them yet. But anyway, so the king is actually leaving on foot.
Oh.
Yes. So this is a sort of diminution of his, dignity. And note the loyalty of his people versus the disloyalty and betrayal of his own son. They're trying to save him and take care of him. Okay, so let's continue.
Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why are you also coming with us? Go back and stay with the king, for you are a foreigner and also an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us while I go wherever I can? Go back and take your kinsfolk with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you. But Ittai answered the king, as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether for death or for life, there also your servant will be. Very much like Ruth, huh?
Yeah,
David-
nice. And
Yeah.
also, again, this guy's not even an Israelite, and he's being as loyal as possible while his son is starting a rebellion against him.
David said to Ittai, go then, march on. So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and all the little ones who were with him. The whole country wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king crossed the Wadi Kidron, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness. Abiathar came up, and Zadok also, with all the Levites, carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They set down the ark of God until the people had all passed out of the city. Then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and the place where it stays. But if he says, I take no pleasure in you, here I am, let him do to me what seems good to him. The king also said to the priest Zadok, look, go back to the city in peace, you and Abiathar, with your two sons, Ahimaaz, your son, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar. See, I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there.
So by the way, the reason he's being so careful about bringing the ark back and, trying to figure out if he should or shouldn't. Remember last time he tried to bring the ark, somebody got zapped and died. The ark is a really powerful thing. Yeah.
But David went up to the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went with his head covered and walking barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went. David was told that Ahithophel was among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray you, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness.
So, this is really a sad picture of David, right? The king, the mighty king who was loved by so many people and had all these wives and all this really incredible good fortune and loved by God and everything else. Here he is, walking, okay, a lot of walking here, not even on a horse or anything, uncovering his head in mourning and, weeping. I don't think we saw David weep ever before, even when his baby was killed, he did do some mourning rituals, but here he's weeping. This is really, really sad. His very own son is rebelling against him. And not only that, look at all these people who are joining the rebellion, right? So this is on the descent part of the curve that that represents his story.
When David came to the summit where God was worshipped, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat torn and earth on his head. David said to him, if you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past. So now I will be your servant. Then you will defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. The priests Zadok and Abiathar will be there with you. So whatever you hear from the king's house, tell it to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. The two sons are with them there, Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. And by them you shall report to me everything you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem.
Okay, so I want to read to you what Alter says about this last scene. This crucial moment in the story is an especially deft manifestation of the system of double causation that Gerhard von Rad and others after him have attributed to the David narrative. Everything in the story is determined by its human actors according to the stringent dictates of political realism, yet simultaneously everything is determined by God. So if you have any questions about free will, here's a real conundrum. Things are determined by human beings, but they're determined by God according to a divine plan in history. David informed that his own shrewd political advisor, Ahitophel, is part of Absalom's conspiracy. So Ahitophel, yeah, that was my cat leaping across. So Ahitophel was his own political advisor, and now he is on Absalom's side, right? So he invokes God. Thwart, pray the counsel of Ahitophel, O Lord. Okay, so we're asking to have God not give good advice to Absalom. On the other hand, let's not just count on God, right? So he reaches a holy site, an altar on the crest of the Mount of Olives. And here he sees Hushai, his loyalty betokened by the trappings of mourning he is assumed coming toward him. Theologically, Hushai is the immediate answer to David's prayer. So it could be, well, on the one hand, I hope that God will take care of this. On the other hand, I better take care of it myself just to be sure. Or you could say they both roll into one thing, which is that God sends Hushai as a spy. We don't know which it is. Depends on your theology. Politically, David seizes upon Hushai as the perfect instrument to thwart Ahitophel's counsel. So from a certain point of view, David is really answering his own prayer through his human initiative. Again, is it his own initiative or is it God who sent Hushai? Yet the encounter with Hushai at a place of worship leaves the lingering intimation that Hushai has been sent by God. So again, depending on your theology, either David says, there's the guy I need, or God says, there's the guy you need. So, okay. Melissa, please. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Remember that. In terms of free will, it seems that David had a lot of choices and made a lot of poor choices. And what I am less certain about is when he was making poor choices, did we see his consequences? Because now we're seeing the consequences of many of his decisions. And so I guess what I'm asking is, back when everything was going well for David, was it because his conduct was better, or is there no way to really rationalize the notion that when you're doing good consequences, when you're doing bad consequences?
Well, that's an interesting question. Anybody have any thoughts about that before I venture to answer it? Christine, go ahead.
Well, I'm always wondering whether or not David is conscious of his actions in general, and whether he's that reflective. I just think that sometimes he's just obtuse and going for power. So I don't know. I mean, Melissa, I can't really answer that in any way other than you never know with David. I can just doubt that he's very reflective.
Yeah, I don't think of David as being particularly self-reflective and conscious of, I mean, look, Nathan came to him and said, look, everything you did in public is going to be done to you in private. And one after the other, his kids enact exactly what Nathan has said. And what does David do? Nothing. He doesn't seem to be conscious at all. I mean, look, Tamar gets raped. Her brother is very upset about it. He does nothing. Then Absalom kills Amnon, and David really doesn't do much except to be cold towards Absalom and let him go stew for a couple of years out of his sight. What is he going to do during those 2 years of stewing? It's not exactly going to be wonderful. And then he doesn't welcome him back with open arms. I mean, I think David, you might say he's a real political animal, right? We see right away when he's a little kid, pretty much. And he finds out, well, not a little kid, he must be, some sort of adolescent, but old enough to get married, but that doesn't mean much in those days. But anyway, so we see right away when we first meet him that, the person who slays Goliath is going to get to marry the king's daughter. And he asks a couple of times to make sure he heard right. He doesn't get the daughter on that round. He gets another daughter later, but you can see right away he's really ambitious, right? And he is a really good warrior. He is attractive. So a lot of things are, going his way. I mean, of course, God has also selected him, so that doesn't hurt. But, he's a very good warrior. He's politically savvy, right? I mean, he doesn't kill Saul. He waits till Saul dies in some other way. He, marries the king's daughter. He marries Abigail. He listens to her wise counsel. He is very savvy. He takes Michal back. Why? Only because he wants the legitimacy of that line, not because he loves her or cares about her one whit. So what we see in the beginning, as I said, this arc, the upside down U, everything's going his way until the Bathsheba thing. Now, after that, there are consequences to his actions, which occur in the downward slope of the upside down U. So I don't know that, what he does in the first part of his life is bad or good. It's just politically astute. He's successful, but on a personal level, he has no clue. And so when his kids, each one of the kids enacts his own internal stuff, like the political ambition or the sexual, impulsivity, he doesn't know what to do about that because that is not his skill set. And I think that's when it starts going downhill. I mean, it starts with his sin with Bathsheba. Yeah, the consequences are everything you did in public is going to be done in private. But then in private is that whole family dynamic with his own children. And he has no idea what to do with that. So I don't know if that answers your question, Melissa.
So I was more looking at his actions than his intentions. Like, did he engage in better actions?
I don't know.
At a moral level.
Yeah, the moral level, I mean, is what happens with Bathsheba, right? Before that, I don't know that there's a morality one way or the other. He's a good warrior. He fights on the right side. He's smart politically. There's nothing really, the only moral thing would be, do you marry somebody because you want to, be the king's son-in-law? I mean, that's not so moral, but hey, how many people do that?
It's not immoral either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's nothing he really does that's particularly immoral until that moment. It's almost like maybe, when you're very successful, you start to completely forget, like, right, you're so powerful that you can have your intern come and do sex with you and deny it and think you can get away with it, right? Yeah. Or you can lie about all kinds of things because you've got power and you think anything you do is okay, right? And it happens to everybody who is in power, right? It gets to your head and you think, I can do anything I want. And that's what happens to him in Jerusalem when he sees Bathsheba. I think that's sort of the crowning moment of his letting power get to him and feeling like he's invulnerable. And again, that happens to so many politicians, right? You just forget that, you're accountable to anybody. And obviously some people do get away with it, right? Christine, go ahead.
There are glimmerings of how, I don't know whether or not it's like moral or immoral, but it seems immoral to me to have a protection racket in the desert, I mean, really, I think there's some precursors to his immorality, but, I mean, I can't imagine that being okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I do think it has a lot to do with what happens when you have power. I mean, the same thing happens with Solomon later, which eventually maybe we'll get to, right? Solomon, I mean, he marries all these women, not because he's in love with how many hundreds of wives he had, but because he forms political partnerships. You're married to another king's daughter, they're going to be less likely to attack you, right? So that's smart. but he also builds a beautiful temple. And in order to do that, what does he have to do? He has to raise taxes and he has to impose a corvée on people, you know, and it gets to be too much. And when he dies, his son, you know, people come to him and say, look, this is too much. We can't deal with it. He was going to maybe listen, but then he goes and talks to some whippersnappers who say, just impose more taxes and more, you know, forced labor. And so this kingdom splits. So, you know, power can become very toxic if you know, believe that you're above it all, except if you're one particular orange person. Anyway, so far, so good. Anyway, Melissa, do you have any?
No, that's done. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question. That's a very good question. I do think that this whole consequence that we're seeing now of the rebellion is a result of his sin with Bathsheba.
Mhm.
You know, before that, he's just, you know, a smart politician who and a smart warrior, and God likes him. But God still likes him now. But now remember that God has made a covenant with David that you will always, always sit on the throne. Not you particularly, but your dynasty, right? So it doesn't really matter. It's not like the Deuteronomic covenant. You know, if you're bad things are going to happen to you. And in fact, you may even be kicked out of the land, right? So interestingly, we're back in the land and there's no Davidic king. So I don't know, something went wrong with these covenants. Christine.
It's interesting to me that the problem is with the Bathsheba situation is not that he rapes her, because he does, but that he kills her husband. So, you know, yet again, we have this like patriarchal thing, which is, you know, it's bad to rape somebody, but unless our brothers take vengeance, you know, it's no big deal. And then, you know, but you don't send a guy purposefully into battle to die.
Well, Christine, to tell you the truth, I don't completely agree with you, because the reason is that when Nathan says everything you did in public will be done to you in private, or the other way around, actually, it's what you did in private will be done to you in public. Okay, sorry. I'm thinking private is family, but it's public is everybody. Okay, anyway, so first of all, the rape is what starts the rape of Tamar starts all of this. And that is his payback for having essentially raped Bathsheba.
Yeah.
Okay, so he rapes Bathsheba, his own son rapes his half-sister.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately in the Bible, if you rape a woman, you're supposed to marry her, which is horrible. On the other hand, if she's raped, she's also like damaged good, and nobody's going to want her. So at least somebody will take care of her. But it's pretty horrible to have the person taking care of her, the person who raped her. But it's a different morality at the time. But yeah, I don't think the Bible is condoning his thing with Bathsheba. I mean, for one thing, it's adultery. Now, it's adultery if you're messing with somebody else's wife, and that is what's supposed to happen to you if you commit adultery. You're supposed to be killed.
Stoning, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't think they're saying, yeah, it's okay.
Okay, I get it.
I mean, I think, right? It doesn't say it in so many words, but just when you look at the consequence.
I had forgotten the Tamar and the connection.
Yeah. That was part of the punishment. Yeah. You know, each son represents a different aspect of his personality. Okay, would somebody like to read?
I'll read.
Thank you.
When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of met him with a couple of donkeys saddled, carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruit, and 1 skin of wine. The king said to Ziba, "Why have you brought these? Ziba answered, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine is for those to drink who faint in the wilderness. The king said, and where is your master's son? Ziba said to the king, he remains in Jerusalem, for he said, today the house of Israel will give me back my grandfather's kingdom. Then the king said to Ziba, all that belonged to
Mephibosheth.
I can't say, is now yours. Ziba said, I do obedience. Let me find favor in your sight, my lord, the king.
Okay, let me just stop for 1 second. So remember, Mephibosheth is the remaining son of, actually, is it Saul or Jonathan? I can't remember now. But remember, he was dropped by his nurse and he's lame. So he's like the final person from King Saul's household. And it says, Alter says, Mephibosheth, who is crippled in both legs, would scarcely have been up to joining the flight from Jerusalem. Because David is being very suspicious, like, what's this guy doing here? But David, overwhelmed by betrayals from within his own court, is suspicious of Mephibosheth's absence. And it's clear that Ziba has been counting on this suspicion in his scheme to discredit Mephibosheth and take over his property. It is noteworthy that at this late date, David still refers to Mephibosheth as your master's son, still thinks of the long dead Jonathan as Ziba's real master. Yeah, he's Jonathan's son, right? And then today the house of Israel will give back to me my father's kingdom. That's the quote, right? There's no corroborating evidence in the story that Mephibosheth actually said these words. What in fact seems to be happening is that Ziba is flatly lying about his master in order to make himself appear to be the only loyal subject worthy of David's benefactions and of title to Saul's property. The notion Ziba puts forth that Absalom would have turned over the throne to the surviving Saulite is highly improbable. But what he proposes to David is that the purportedly treacherous Mephibosheth sees in the general political upheaval of the rebellion an opportunity to reinstate the house of Saul. So in other words, Ziba is claiming that this guy, Mephibosheth, wants to get on the throne, and it's a lie. There's no evidence anywhere else that this is, his plan. So David gives him all of Mephibosheth's property. Another schemer. Lots of schemers going on here. Okay.
Okay. When King David came to Bahurim, a man of the family of the house of Saul came out, whose name was Shimei, son of Gera. He came out cursing. He threw stones at David and all the servants of King David. Now all the people and all the warriors were on his right and on his left. Shimei shouted while he cursed, out, out, murderer, scoundrel. The Lord has avenged on all of you the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom unto the hand of your son Absalom. See, disaster has overtaken you, for you are a man of blood. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord, the king? Let me go over and take off his head. Yeah. But the king said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? David said to Abishai and to all his servants, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite let him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has bidden him. It may be that the Lord will look on my distress, and the Lord will repay me with good for this cursing of me today. So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went. throwing stones and flinging dust at him. The king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself.
Thank you. All right, let me read this thing. I mean, this is obviously a pretty humiliating scene for David, right? And verse 10, the king said, what have I done to you what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? Okay. This is one of the most astonishing turning points in this story that abounds in human surprises. The proud, canny, often implacable David here resigns himself to accepting the most stinging humiliation from a person he could easily have his men kill. David's abasement is not a disguise, like Odysseus's when he takes on the appearance of a beggar, but a real change in condition, from which, however, he will emerge in more than one surprising way. The acceptance of humiliation is a kind of fatalism. If someone commits such a sacrilegious act against the man who is God's anointed king, it must be because God has decreed it. Behind that fatalism may be a sense of guilt. I am suffering all this because of what I have done, for taking Bathsheba and murdering her husband, for my inaction in Amnon's rape of Tamar, and Absalom's murder of Amnon. The guilt is coupled with despair. As David goes on to say, when my own son is trying to kill me, what difference could it make if this man of a rival tribe, who at least has political grounds for hostility toward me, should revile me? So it's quite an amazing turn when you think about David, the incredible warrior, being humiliated by these people. And yes, he could turn around and chop their heads off, but he doesn't. Again, maybe he's feeling guilty finally. Who knows?
Yeah.
Again, he doesn't have much of an interior life, right? That's what we were saying before. Okay, Susie, you want to finish the chapter?
Yeah. Now Absalom and all the Israelites came to Jerusalem. Ahithophel was with him. When Hushai, the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king, long live the king." Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" Hushai said to Absalom, "No, but the one whom the Lord and this people and all the Israelite have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. Moreover, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? Just as I have served your father, so I will serve you."
Okay, just notice Hushai, remember, is now a spy in this camp. And notice how ambiguous his words are. Long live the king. Which king? He's not saying Absalom. He's not saying David either, because he's trying to ingratiate himself with this guy. And he says, and Absalom says, why aren't you being loyal to your friend? And Hushai says, the one the Lord has chosen. It's not you, buddy, but he doesn't say who it is. I'm going to be with the one the Lord and the people have chosen. So, as I said, he's ingratiating himself to Absalom without coming right out and saying it, because he's a spy and he's trying to make sure that Ahitophel, who used to be with David, is going to give Absalom bad advice so that he doesn't win against David. Okay, verse 20, please.
Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give us your counsel. What shall we do?" Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Go to your father's concubines, the ones he had left to look after the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself odious to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom upon the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubine in the sight of all Israel. Now, in those days, the counsel or Ahithophel was as if one consulted the oracle of God. So all the counsel or Ahithophel was esteemed both by David and by Absalom.
Okay, so the first thing Ahithophel tells Absalom to do is go sleep with your father's concubines. Remember, Reuben, the oldest son of Jacob, did the same thing. That is a big fat no-no, right? Now, this is what also cohabiting with the sexual consorts of a ruler is an assertion of having taken over all his prerogatives of dominion. Ahithophel's shrewd counsel especially addresses the effect on public opinion of the action. I mean, this is, again, I misspoke earlier when I said everything that you did in public will be done in private. It's everything you did in private will be done in public. So in public, his son, David's son, is going to go sleep with his concubines. Everybody is going to know. Everybody's going to know, right? After it, no one will be able to imagine a reconciliation between Absalom and his father, right? Everyone is going to hear about it. And so the hand of Absalom's supporters will be strengthened, for no one will hedge his support thinking that David and Absalom will somehow come to terms. It'll be very clear when Absalom sleeps with these concubines. Remember, there were like 10 of them.
Wow.
That's it, right? Now, also notice that in verse 22, they pitched a tent for Absalom upon the roof. Remember that roof? That's the roof where David saw Bathsheba. So it's all coming together in the same place, right? So now you have, Absalom, again, sort of recreating his father's behavior, but now for everyone to see and to know about. Okay, before we continue, anybody have any questions, comments? Everybody's good? Okay. Never think the Bible is just a boring book, I mean, there's lots of sex and violence in it, right? It would be, at least R-rated, right?
So I have a question about the concubines.
Yeah.
So is he doing this one after another?
Or all at once.
If he was, I think I'd like to be number 10 when he's kind of tired out. But seriously, we went through, Saul has his thousands and David has his 10,000s. And now Absalom, I mean, David did one woman at a time. And I think there was space between them. But Absalom is 10 times his father sexually.
Well, okay. I don't know if he's doing it all at the same time or consecutively.
He is some man.
Yeah, right. I don't know whether maybe he did this for 10 months. We don't know how long it took him. Okay. And let's assume that this is a bit exaggerated. Like, did he really have 10 concubines sitting there? Who knows? Christine.
For him, really 120.
Right. Right.
But aside from the sex, which is hard to ignore, but these women represent alliances, and they're ways of asserting that he has the alliances that David had made. Mm-hmm. and amassing, not sexual power, although that's like weird. I keep imagining one of these sort of deities with 10 penises, I'm just like,
Susie, it's a good thing you didn't miss
over
this.
Here to the side here.
Susie, it's a good thing you didn't miss this part of the discussion. You missed the boring part.
But the more serious thing is that the concubines really are sort of up for grabs to the most powerful, but they represent alliances. So he's claiming the alliances that David had. Correct.
So it's partially the political aspect of them and partially the sexual aspect. Okay. Melissa, did you have something else, or anybody? No?
I think this is the equivalent of leg lifting. Dogs, they have to lift their leg higher than the next dog. Well,
that's a way to put it.
or, just stealing his cars. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
pathetic. Men are so pathetic. Yeah.
It's true. I mean, can you imagine a woman deciding that she's going to take over, and by doing that, she's going to sleep with, somebody's.
Well, but that's only
No such thing
because
as a concubine for men, anyway. I mean, a male concubine. What's that?
that's called a gigolo. I don't know. I mean, that's partly based on sociological development. I think there are women now who are overly sexualized as a way to trying to think of who we could identify. And
The Kardashians.
thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely.
Or like that, women are also collecting partners. I don't think it's a very healthy quality in either men or women, but then I'm just imposing my values on other people. So
I'm just thinking of the sexual diseases that are being transmitted.
Oh God, you're right. That's why they died young, I think. But
yeah, that's
again,
probably true.
remember here that the point of sleeping with the concubines has nothing to do with his interest in them sexually. It has to do with the statement it makes. Because remember, it's Ahitophel's idea, not Solomon's. I mean, not Absalom's. It's Ahitophel who says, go do this, right?
You talk about pornography.
And you should see some of the stuff the rabbis talk about when they do their interpretations of this stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be it.
They make up a lot of stuff. I mean,
So
maybe they're sexually repressed.
you know what? All the books that are being banned, why aren't they banning the Bible?
There's a very good question. We should raise that with DeSantis, but he's too fixated on math books like pre-calculus, his secret critical race.
Or the don't say gay. So what about Jonathan and David?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. I'm going to have to send him a letter and say, listen, Governor DeSantis, I think you better ban this story.
Yeah.
It gives some kids some ideas.
And maybe he wasn't very good at story problems when he was a kid.
This guy went to Harvard or Yale.
He went to Harvard. Yes.
Yeah.
What does that tell you?
But he was a good baseball player. I think he got in on a sports scholarship, to be honest. And it's not that he's stupid.
Really?
He's not
that makes him all the more that's why
Oh.
it makes him so much more dangerous, because
He's not stupid. He wants to be president.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of stupid.
well,
He's stupid if he wants to be president in this day and age.
Okay, who would like to read chapter 17?
I can read a little bit.
Okay, go ahead, and then Christine will pick it up.
Moreover, Ahithophel said to
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Is it Ahithophel?
Ahitophel.
Ahithophel. Oh, I said
I don't know where the accents go.
And
That's
Ahithophel said to Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men, and I will set out and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged, and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king, and I will bring all the people back to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You see another sexual reference. You see the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace. You seek the life. The advice pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel.
Okay, now let me ask you a question. Does this sound like a good strategy?
Probably not.
It sounds like suicide.
How's he going to kill? How is he going to kill only David and not all the other people protecting David?
Exactly.
Well, okay, he's going to take 12,000 men with him. And David right now is really bummed out, right? He's kind of depressed. And, he's in this sort of mourning mode, and he's walking and all of that. And, well, I know what's coming next. So this is actually decent advice. Okay, this is Ahitophel, who's very smart. And this is a good strategy to go get David at this vulnerable moment. Now, remember, Hushai has come to thwart Ahitophel's advice. So now we're going to see Ahitophel's suggestion, which is not going to be a good one, purposefully. Okay. So let's just go down here.
Then Absalom said, call Hushai the Archite and let us hear too what he has to say. When Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom said to him, this is what Ahithophel has said. What shall we do as he advises? If not, you tell us. Then Hushai said to Absalom, the counsel that Ahithophel has given is not good. Hushai continued, you know that your father and his men are warriors and that they are enraged like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is expert in war. He will not spend the night with troops. Even now, he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place. And when some of our troops fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, there has been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the valiant warrior whose heart is like the heart of a lion will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a warrior and that those who are with him are valiant warriors. But my counsel is that all Israel will be gathered to you from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand by the sea for the multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we shall come upon him in whatever place he may be found, and we shall fight on him as the dew falls on the ground, and he will not survive, nor will any of those with him. But if he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag it into the valley until not even a pebble is to be found there. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai the Archite is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. So for the Lord has ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so that the Lord might bring ruin on Absalom.
Okay, so first of all, by the way, going back up here, so the idea here is that Ahithophel presents to Absalom is that everybody's going to flee, leaving just the king to be killed, okay? Which is an echo of what David did to Bathsheba's husband. Remember, the letter said,
Yeah.
everybody should withdraw and leave him alone, which is not what Joab did. Remember, Joab said to himself, that's going to be so obvious. He just put him in the front line. He got him killed that way. But anyway, so it's an echo of that. There's always a lot of intertextuality going on, you know, either in the same story or from one story to the other, like Jacob doing nothing about his daughter being raped, just like David does nothing, you know. So the other thing is that verse 12, it's kind of a bloodthirsty alternative. And this is something that apparently will appeal to Absalom, according to our friend Robert Alter. He says, we shall light upon him as the dew falls upon the ground. Hushai, as Fokelman has observed, pairs the traditional simile of the sands of the seashore with the more innovative yet related simile of dew on the field. The dew falls silently, effortlessly, and this is how this huge army will light upon David's forces. Dew elsewhere, an image of peacetime blessing, is here associated with destruction. And then he says, not a single one will be left of all the men who are with him. Ahithophel proposed a strategy through which it might be possible to kill David alone, and then to enlist the support of his followers. Hushai's counsel is to annihilate David's forces, a much more violent means of preventing civil war. The bloodthirsty alternative evidently appeals to something in Absalom, who's unwilling to trust the future loyalty of the troops who have remained with David. So you see, the thing that Ahithophel suggests is you just get David killed, and then the troops, you get them on your side. And, you know, because the more people you kill on the other side, the more hideous consequences there are to a civil war, right? The fewer people you kill, the more you can get them on your side, you can resolve the civil war, right, in a better way. But this Hushai's counsel is to be as bloody as possible, which actually is not smart. He's purposely giving him something that's not a good way to do this, because it's going to be a big combat, and, you know, killing one person is different from killing all these other people. and the chances of their being defeated are pretty great. However, Absalom likes that advice much better.
Well, tell it to Putin too.
Oh, exactly. No, no one ever says that history doesn't repeat itself, or if they do, they're not paying attention.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay,
Shall I
yeah,
go
go.
on?
Yeah.
Okay. Then Hushai said to the priests Zadok and Abiathar, thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so I have counseled. Therefore, send quickly and tell David, do not lodge tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means cross over. Otherwise, the king and all the people who are with him will be swallowed up. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting at En-Rogel. A servant girl was used to go and tell them, and they would go and tell King David, for they could not risk being seen entering the city. But a boy saw them and told Absalom. So both of them went away quickly and came to the house of a man in Bahurim who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down to it. The man's wife took a covering, stretched it over the well's mouth, and spread out grain on it, and nothing was known of it. That's clever. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? The woman said to them, they have crossed over the brook of water. And when they had searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem.
So as Alter points out, here again is a shrewd woman saving the day.
Yep.
You remember another woman who saved a couple of guys earlier, like I don't know how long ago we read that in the book of Joshua.
Rachel?
Well, Rachel hid the household idols.
The prostitute that
Yes.
let him go over the wall.
Yes, Rahab. Remember, Rahab hid
Rahab.
the two spies.
Yeah.
And here you have this woman, very smart, puts the grain over the well, and they're hiding inside. So yay. Thank you, Harvey. Okay.
After they had gone, the men came out of the well and went and told King David. They said to David, go and cross the water quickly, for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you. So David and all the people who were with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself. He died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Then David came to Mahanaim while Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had set Amasa over the army in the place of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. The Israelites and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. When David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, son of Amiel from Lo Debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds, basins, and earthen vessels, wheat, barley, meat, parched grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. And for they said, the troops are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness.
Okay, so Ahithophel, why does he kill himself?
His counsel was not followed, so he's dead meat.
Exactly. If David wins, he's definitely dead meat. And notice he's very practical. He goes home, he takes care of his affairs, and then he hangs himself. Make sure his family's well taken care of.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions, comments before we go to the next chapter? Okay, here we go. The big battle. Oh boy. All righty. Now, do you remember the description of Absalom when we anybody remember a very important feature of Absalom when he was described in I think last time or the time before?
Well, is he the guy with the limp? Or
Yeah, the limp was Ishbosheth. Yeah, that was Jonathan's son.
I don't remember.
Okay, he has big, beautiful hair.
Oh,
Remember that?
yes. Yeah.
Very important about his hair.
Nice.
Okay. All right. Who would like to start reading here? Do you want to keep going, Christine?
Sure. Then David mustered the men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. And David divided the army into 3 groups, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. Then the king said to the men, I myself will also go out with you. But the men said, you shall not go out, for if we flee, they will not care about us. If half of us die, they will not care about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better that you send us help from the city. The king said to them, whatever seems best to you, I will do. So the king stood at the side of the gate while all the army marched out by hundreds and by thousands. The king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders concerning Absalom.
Okay, 2 things. One is, he's standing by the gate, which is where Absalom recently was, right? Ingratiating himself. But when he says deal gently with Absalom, I mean, Absalom has started a civil war. I mean, this is a danger to the entire country, right? And it's traitorous. And what do you do with a traitor? You don't deal gently with him, even if he's your son. And we see David increasingly getting weaker as time goes on here, and he really has no understanding of how to deal with his own kids. Because this is not just any old kid. This is a kid who's started a rebellion against the country, right? It's not okay. And everybody heard it. And that's not a good thing. Okay, go ahead.
So the army went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. The men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David, and the slaughter there was great on that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest claimed more victims that day than the sword. Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak. His head caught fast in the oak. There's the hair.
The hair, yes, the hair.
Yeah, and he was left hanging between heaven and earth while the mule that was under him went on. A man saw it. That's actually kind of funny. A man saw it and told Joab, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Joab said to the man who told him, what, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, for my sake, protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you. He took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And the 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him.
So, hung by your own petard, sort of, what's happening here to Absalom. He was very, very concerned with his hair, remember? And now that's, gonna result in his dying. And of course, again, Joab, who is the general, who's also a nephew of David's, says, you got to kill the guy, right?
Yeah,
you got to kill him. He's a traitor. Look, he's the cause of tens of thousands of people being killed. You can't have this.
Mhm.
And so he, takes it upon himself to kill the kid, right? Which, is not going to go over well with David, but David is not behaving like a king right now, right? So let's get to the end of this little story.
Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops came back from pursuing Israel, for Joab restrained the troops. They took Absalom, threw him into a great pit in the forest, and raised over him a very great heap of stones. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up for himself a pillar that is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar by his own name. It is called Absalom's monument to this day.
Like you. So I just want to point a couple things out that I forgot to mention. Okay, so when Absalom, is on this mule and the mule like runs off and he's just kind of hanging, it's sort of, a sort of metaphor for the royal seat, disappearing from him. Also, remember that, what was his name? Ahitophel, who, now my computer is freezing, who rides off on the mule, right? Goes home and then hangs himself, but he's on his mule. This guy is off his mule, right? And so there's a contrast between the two of them. Also, remember, Ahitophel is buried, with dignity, not Absalom. He's thrown into this pit. And the other thing is, remember when Joab thinks that there's a possibility of a reconciliation between Absalom and David, he encourages David to invite him back, right? Have him come back, Now he realizes there's no way they're going to reconcile. So he kills him, right? He's very, very, shrewd about stuff. All right. Any other comments?
Looks
All
like
right,
they're
now-
both
yeah.
hanging, and they're both kind of hanging. One hung himself,
Right.
and the other was hanging by a tree.
Right. Right, exactly. Yeah. So you have the contrast between Ahitophel, who's also a traitor, but he is able to ride his mule back. He's able to get his affairs in order. He chooses to kill himself by hanging. He's buried with his father, everything that you're, the way you're supposed to do it. Whereas this guy, it's all exactly the opposite. He loses the mule, he's hanging, he gets, killed, he gets thrown in the pit. I mean, nothing dignified about it.
Is there a significance to him being not only thrown into the pit, but all the stones on top of him? Is that like kind of a reference to the stoning for his having slept with the concubines?
That's interesting. Let me see if, let's see, what verse is that? 17. I just want to see if there's a note here. Well, it says, what Alter says is that it's a shameful, to be flung into a hole in the field and covered with a heap of stones is a shameful burial.
Yeah, it sounds like a stoning, basically. And,
Yeah. Well, it could be, but he doesn't mention that. Okay, let's see what happens when David hears about it.
Then Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok, said, let me run and carry tidings to the king that the Lord has delivered him from the power of his enemies. Joab said to him, you are not to carry tidings today. You may carry tidings another day, but today you shall not do so because the king's son is dead. Then Joab said to a Cushite, go, tell the king what you have seen. The Cushite bowed before Joab and ran. Then Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said to Joab, come what may, let me also run after the Cushite. And Joab said, why will you run, my son, seeing that you have no reward for the tidings? Come what may, he said, I will run. So he said to him, run. Then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. Now David was sitting between the two gates. The sentinel went up to the roof of the gate by the wall, and when he looked up, he saw a man running alone. The sentinel shouted and told the king. The king said, "If he is alone, there are tidings in his mouth." He kept coming and drew near. Then the sentinel saw another man running, and the sentinel called to the gatekeeper and said, "See, another man running alone." The king said, "He is also bringing tidings." The sentinel said, "I think the running of the first one is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok." Boy, good sentinel. The king said, "He is a good man and comes with good tidings."
Sure thing.
Yeah, really. Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, "All is well." He prostrated himself before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Blessed be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against the Lord my king, my lord the king." The king said, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I do not know what it was." The king said, "Turn aside and stand here." So he turned aside and stood still. Then the Cushite came, and the Cushite said, "Good tidings for my lord the king, for the Lord has vindicated you this day, delivering you from the power of all who rose against you." The king said to the Cushite, "Is it well with the young man Absalom?" Cushite answered, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to do you harm be like that young man."
So, of course, all these guys think that the king will be happy to find out that the traitor has been killed, which obviously is going to be the opposite. Okay, let's read that very moving ending.
The king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, oh Absalom, my son, my son."
Very sad, very
Yeah.
sad. We'll just stop for here. It is his son. You can understand why he would be upset, but at the same time, he's the king. So whereas in the past, it seems like he's allowed his political side to dominate to the detriment of his personal relationships, especially with his family. Here, he's allowing his personal feelings to get in the way of his position as the king. Because this, and we'll see, Joab is going to, call him to task for that, because, hey, guess what? You got to get your act together here.
It's interesting to me that the people bringing the tidings are being very cautious in what they're telling him.
Yeah.
They don't want to get killed.
Right. We've seen what's happened before when David
Yeah.
got bad news. He
Yeah.
killed the messenger, right? You're right. They don't want to be completely straightforward about it. Any other thoughts or comments about David at this? Yeah, David. So
It's also interesting to me that he can only really feel when somebody is removed from disputing him over power. And once he's removed, you can feel the agony of losing your son.
right.
But he doesn't do it beforehand, about the estrangement or.
Yeah, exactly. He could have found some way to reconcile with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it may or may not have worked, but he doesn't even try. That kiss is this very cold kiss, and he doesn't really talk to him, and he has to get Joab to tell him to bring him back. Yeah, he's very flawed, very, very flawed. But I think he represents a certain kind of person. There are plenty of people out there who are very ambitious, whether it's politically or in terms of business or whatever, who neglect their families or, don't deal well with their families or their personal relations. And, he's the epitome of that. But remember what happens with Moses. Moses has gone back to liberate the people. He is now about to receive the 10 Commandments and the Torah and everything else. And oops, he forgot that he has a family. And Jethro, his father-in-law, has to bring his wife and his kids back to him and say, hey, by the way, right? So Moses is kind of similar in that way. And remember Moses at the well. So the well is what Robert Alf calls a type scene. So the well is where a lot of people meet each other, men and women, right? As opposed to a bar or an app. You meet at the well. So, for example, when Jacob meets Rachel, he cries, he loves her, they kiss, the whole thing. Moses meets all these daughters of Jethro at the well. He helps them out, just like Jacob helps, Rachel. But he doesn't specifically pick one of the women. He ends up marrying Zipporah, but Jethro probably says to him, here, take this one. It's not clear that, he has any preference for any of them. And you don't see much of a relationship between them. He's very much focused on his, career, his leadership, and it's hard to do both. But, certainly women have been trying to do that for a long time, is to try to balance having a career and a family. But a lot of times men just kind of go off and do their thing. And there are women who do that too. So I think these are examples of men who are not able to really have relationships with their own family, and they suffer as a consequence, ultimately. I think we're going to stop here because I don't want to, pick up at another chapter, because the next chapter is pretty long. But next time we'll see the result of that. And how many more chapters? We only have a few more chapters. Yeah, it'll take us a while. Okay, before we get to the Book of Kings. So thank you all. And
this was terrific today. I really enjoyed
Susie
it.
I was overwhelmed by it enough. There she is.
There she is.
Christine, will you stay on for a second? I want to talk to you for a minute.
Oh, sure, Sandy.
Okay, so I'm going to stop recording.